Princess Zara stood in the center of the diplomatic chamber, her hands clasped. Behind her back, the room was made of smooth white crystal that seemed to glow with its own light. Everything on her ship was perfect and clean, just like her people liked it. She wore the traditional purple robes of her royal family, and her violet skin had the faint shimmer that showed she was of noble blood. The princess took a slow breath and cleared her mind. This was the most important day in the history of her people, the Velter Empire. Today they would meet humans for the first time. She had studied the reports about these strange beings from a small blue planet called Earth. The humans were young and wild, nothing like her own people, who had learned to control their emotions perfectly over thousands of years. Zara's people, the Velter, had a dangerous gift. When they felt strong emotions, their minds could create powerful energy storms. These storms could break machines, hurt people, and even destroy whole spaceships. That was why every Velter child learned from birth to keep their feelings locked away deep inside their hearts. They had to stay calm and peaceful all the time, or terrible things would happen. The princess had never lost control, not even once. She was famous throughout the empire for her perfect discipline. Her teachers said she was the most controlled Velter who had ever lived. Even when her father, the king, had died in battle, she had not shed a single tear in public. She had stood at his funeral with a face as still as stone, while inside her heart was breaking. Now she was 25 years old and commanded her own battle fleet. She had never failed at anything important, but today felt different. Today she felt a strange nervousness that she could not explain. The doors to the chamber opened with a soft sound. Her advisor, Commander Kex, stepped inside. His green skin was darker than hers, showing he was from the working class. But he was one of the smartest beings. She knew. "Princess, the human ship has arrived," Kex said in their musical language. "They are asking permission to come aboard." Zara nodded. "How many of them?" "Only 3. Their leader, someone they call an ambassador, and 2 guards. The ambassador is an older female. 1 guard is a young male, also young. The other guard is a male soldier." "A soldier?" Zara asked. She found this interesting. Most species send only diplomats to first meetings. Why would the humans bring a warrior? "Yes, princess, our scans show he has been in many battles. His body has several old wounds that have healed. The humans seem to trust him greatly." Zara thought about this. Her people had soldiers too, but they kept them far away from important diplomatic meetings. Soldiers were useful for fighting, but they were not good at the careful, polite conversations that diplomacy required. Soldiers felt too much anger and excitement. They were dangerous to have around. "Very well," she said. "Bring them to the main chamber. Make sure our guards are ready, but keep them hidden. We do not want the humans to think we do not trust them." Commander Kex bowed and left. Zara was alone again in the crystal room. She walked to the large window that looked out into space. She could see the human ship floating nearby. It was ugly compared to her beautiful vessel, where her ship was smooth and curved. Like a work of art, the human ship was square and rough. It looked like it was built for war, not beauty. But there was something about it that made her feel. What was the word? Interested. That was strange. She had seen thousands of ships in her life, and none of them had ever made her feel anything at all. She shook her head and pushed the feeling away. She could not afford to feel anything today. Too much depended on these talks going well. If the humans became enemies of the Velter Empire, there would be war. And war meant death and suffering for millions of people on both sides. The doors opened again. This time 3 humans walked in. First was a woman with gray hair and kind eyes. She wore a dark blue uniform with shiny metal badges on it. She moved slowly and carefully, like someone who was used to being around important people. This had to be the ambassador. The second human was a young man, also in uniform. He was tall and thin, with nervous eyes that looked around the room like he was expecting trouble. His hand stayed close to the weapon on his belt, but it was the third human who made Zara's breath catch in her throat. He was not as tall as the other male, but he was built like a fighter. His shoulders were broad and his arms looked strong. His uniform was different from the others, where theirs were clean and new. His showed signs of use and wear. There were faded spots where badges had been removed and small repairs in the fabric. His hair was brown and cut very short. His face was hard with small scars that spoke of violence survived. But his eyes were what struck her most. They were blue like a deep ocean, and they held a sadness that seemed very old. These were the eyes of someone who had seen terrible things and had learned to carry the weight of them. When he looked at her, Zara felt something she had never experienced before. It was like a warm current running through her body, starting in her chest and spreading outward. Her hands began to shake slightly, and she quickly clasped them tighter behind her back. What was happening to her? She had met thousands of beings from dozens of different species. None of them had ever affected her like this. She took a deep breath and tried to center herself, using the meditation techniques she had learned as a child. It did not work. If anything, the strange feeling grew stronger. The human soldier stepped forward with his companions. As he moved, Zara noticed the way he carried himself. He was alert, but not nervous like the younger guard. He looked around the room not with fear, but with the professional eye of someone who was used to being in dangerous places. When his gaze passed over the hidden doors where her own guards waited, she saw his eyes pause for just a moment. He knew they were there. This should have worried her. Instead, she found herself impressed. The human was clearly very good at what he did. The ambassador began to speak using a translation device that turned her words into the Velter language. Your Highness, I am Ambassador Linda Carter of the United Earth Government. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. Zara tried to focus on the woman's words, but her eyes kept drifting to the soldier. He stood perfectly still, his hands at his sides, watching everything. He was doing his job, protecting his people just like her guards were protecting her. But there was something else in his manner. Unlike her own guards who were trained to show no emotion at all, this human seemed alive. There was a warmth in his presence that she could feel even from across the room. It was not threatening, but it was powerful in a way she did not understand. I am Princess Zara, she managed to say, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. Welcome to my ship. I hope we can find common ground between our peoples. As she spoke, she saw Soldier's eyes meet hers directly. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. In his gaze, she saw recognition of something, not romantic attraction, but something deeper. It was as if he saw past her royal title and her perfect control to the person underneath. And in that moment, Princess Zara realized she was in terrible danger, not from weapons or war, but from something far more frightening. She was starting to feel the meeting had been going on for 2 hours, and Princess Zara was losing the battle against herself. Every time the human soldier moved, even just to shift his weight from one foot to the other, she felt that strange warm current flow through her body again. It was getting stronger, and it was getting harder to hide. Ambassador Carter was talking about trade agreements and peaceful cooperation between their species. The words seemed to float around Zara's head without meaning. All she could focus on was the soldier standing quietly behind the ambassador. He had not spoken once during the entire meeting, but his presence filled the room like a fire fills a cold house. The princess tried to use her breathing exercises, in through the nose, hold for 4 counts, out through the mouth. This had always worked before, but now each breath seemed to make the feeling stronger instead of weaker. She could feel her skin beginning to warm, and she knew that soon the faint glow that came with emotional distress would begin to show. Commander Keck stood beside her, and she could sense his worry. He knew her better than anyone, and he could tell something was wrong. His own emotional control was perfect as always, but she could feel his concern like a cold breeze against her mind. The young human guard was nervous. She could sense his fear and excitement mixing together. He kept looking around the room, his hand never moving far from his weapon. His emotions were loud and chaotic, like a storm, but they did not affect her the way the soldiers did. The soldiers' emotions were different. They were not loud or chaotic. They were deep and steady, like the sound of ocean waves against a shore. There was sadness in him, yes, but also strength. There was loneliness, but also fierce loyalty to his people. There was pain from old wounds, but also a determination to keep fighting despite that pain. It was beautiful, and it was destroying her. Princess Zara realized she had stopped listening to the ambassador completely. She forced herself to focus on the woman's words. We understand that your people value peace and stability, Ambassador Carter was saying. Earth has had many wars, and we have learned that cooperation is better than conflict. We hope to learn from your wisdom. Learn from their wisdom, if only they. Ambassador knew that right now the wisest of the Velter was struggling not to fall apart in front of her guests. Zara tried to speak, but her voice came out rougher than usual. She cleared her throat and tried again. Yes, peace is what peace is very important to my people. We have worked for many centuries to achieve harmony. The soldier's eyes moved to her face. When she spoke, there was something in his expression, a slight frown of concern. Could he tell that something was wrong with her? Humans were supposed to be good at reading emotions in others. Her people had hidden their feelings for so long that they had almost forgotten how to see them. The temperature in the room was starting to rise. Zara could feel it. and she knew others would notice soon. When Velter lost control of their emotions, the first sign was always heat. Then came the light. Then came the energy storms that could tear apart metal and stone. She had to get out of this room. Perhaps, she said, standing up. Quickly. We should take a short break. Diplomatic meetings can be tiring. We have rooms prepared for you if you would like to rest. Ambassador Carter looked surprised but nodded politely. Of course, Your Highness, thank you for your hospitality. As the humans prepared to leave, the soldier stepped forward. For a moment, Zara thought he was going to speak to her directly. Her heart began to beat so fast, she was sure everyone in the room could hear it. But he just nodded respectfully and followed his companions toward the door. Just before he left, he turned back and looked at her one more time. Their eyes met across the crystal chamber, and Zara felt something break inside her. Just not break like something being destroyed, but break like a dam giving way to a flood. The soldier's expression was gentle, almost kind. He seemed to be asking if she was all right, though he said nothing. For just a moment she saw past his warrior's training to the man underneath. He was someone who cared about others, someone who would put himself in danger to protect people he did not even know. Then he was gone, and Zara was alone with Commander Kex. She waited until she was sure the humans were far enough away. Then she let herself collapse into her chair. Her whole body was shaking now, and the air around her shimmered with heat. Princess, Kex said quietly, what is happening to you? Zara put her head in her hands. I do not know. I have never felt anything like this before. It is like my mind is coming apart. Is it the humans? Are they using some kind of weapon against us? No, Zara said quickly. It is not a weapon. It is. She struggled to find words for something she had never experienced. It is the soldier. There is something about him that makes me feel everything. Commander Kex was quiet for a long moment. Princess, you know what happens when our people lose emotional control. The last time it happened, 3 ships were destroyed and hundreds died. Zara knew. She had studied the history. 200 years ago, a young Velter had fallen in love with someone from another species. When that person had died in an accident, the Velter's grief had exploded outward in a psychic storm that had torn apart everything within a mile of where he stood. After that, her people had made even stricter rules about emotional control. I know, she whispered, but I do not know how to stop it. Every time I look at him, every time he moves or breathes, I feel like I am falling into something deep and warm and terrifying. We must contact the High Council, Kex said. They will know what to do. No. Zara's voice was sharp. If the council learns that I am losing control, they will remove me from command. They will end these talks and probably declare the humans a threat to our people. There will be war. But Princess, if you cannot control yourself, I will find a way. She stood up, her legs still unsteady. I have to. Too much depends on this. She walked to the window and looked out at the human ship again. It was still ugly, still rough and warlike, but now it seemed less threatening and more honest. It was exactly what it was, with no pretense or decoration to hide its true nature. Like the soldier. The thought came to her suddenly. The soldier was not like people who hid everything behind masks of perfect calm. He carried his pain and his strength openly, not trying to hide what he was. Maybe that was why he affected her so strongly. He was real in a way that she had never been allowed to be. A soft chime sounded, meaning someone was requesting entry to her chamber. "Come," she called. Commander Kex entered carrying a small communication device. "Princess, Elder Tyvon wishes to speak with you. It is urgent." Elder Tyvon was her old teacher, the one who had trained her in emotional control. When she was a child, he was the wisest of the Velter, and he lived far away on their home world. For him to call her directly meant he had sensed something was wrong. Zara took the device with trembling hands. Tyvon's ancient face appeared in the small screen, his silver eyes full of concern. "My child," he said in their musical language. "I felt a disturbance in the psychic field around your location. Are you in danger?" Zara looked at her old teacher, the being who had taught her everything she knew about controlling her emotions. She could lie to him. She was skilled enough to hide the truth, at least for a while. But she was tired of hiding. "Master," she said quietly, "I think I am falling in love with a human." The old Velter's eyes widened in shock. In all his centuries of life, he had never heard a member of his species say those words. "Tell me everything," he said. Elder Tyvon arrived on Princess Zara's ship just 12 hours after their conversation. He had traveled faster than anyone thought possible for a being of his age. When he stepped out of his small transport craft, Zara could see the worry on his ancient face. She met him in her private chambers, away from the crew and away from the humans who were staying in the guest quarters. Tyvon looked older than she remembered. His silver hair was thinner and his pale skin had more lines around his eyes. But his mind was still sharp as a blade. "Show me," he said without greeting or ceremony. Zara knew what he meant. She closed her eyes and let her mental barriers down just a little. Immediately the warm, chaotic feeling flooded through her. The air in the room began to shimmer with heat, and the crystal walls started to glow faintly. Tyvon stepped back, his eyes wide. In all his 800 years of life, he had never felt anything like what was coming from his former student. It was not just loss of control. It was something entirely new. "By the ancient stars," he whispered. "Child, what have the humans done to you?" "Nothing," Zara said, pulling her barriers back up. With great effort, the room slowly returned to normal. "They have done nothing at all. It is just him, the soldier. When he is near, I cannot think clearly. When he looks at me, I feel like I am melting from the inside out." Tyvon sat down heavily in one of her chairs. "This should not be possible. Our people have perfect emotional control. It is what makes us who we are." "I know. But Master, what if our control is not as perfect as we thought? What if we have just been hiding from something that was always there?" The old teacher shook his head. "No, child, we learned control because we had to. When our people first developed psychic abilities thousands of years ago, emotions were weapons of mass destruction. Entire cities were destroyed by lovers, quarrels, and family arguments. We had to learn to suppress our feelings, or we would have destroyed ourselves. Zara sat across from him. But what if there is another way? What if instead of hiding from our emotions, we could learn to live with them? Impossible. The risk is too great. Master, I need you to see him. I need you to understand what I'm experiencing. Maybe you can help me figure out what is happening. Typhon was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Very well. But we must be careful. If what you are experiencing is contagious, it could spread to the entire crew. They made plans for the next diplomatic meeting. Typhon would observe from a hidden chamber where he could see and hear everything without being detected. He would monitor the psychic field around the room and try to understand what the human soldier was doing to affect Zara so strongly. The meeting was scheduled for the next morning. Zara spent the night trying to meditate, but sleep would not come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the soldier's face. She remembered the way he had looked at her with concern, as if he could tell she was in distress and wanted to help. No one had ever looked at her that way before. As a princess, people looked at her with respect, fear, or greed. They wanted something from her, or they were afraid of her power. But the human soldier had looked at her like she was just a person who might need help. When morning came, Zara felt worse than ever. Her skin was warm to the touch and her hands shook when she tried to hold anything. Commander Kex was worried enough that he suggested canceling the meeting, but Zara refused. I have to face this, she told him. If I cannot control myself around one human, how can I lead my people in dealing with their entire species? The humans arrived on time. Ambassador Carter looked rested and cheerful. The young guard still seemed nervous, his eyes darting around the room. And the soldier looked directly at Zara. As soon as he entered the room, there was something different in his expression today. He looked concerned, almost worried. Had he noticed that something was wrong with her yesterday? Elder Typhon was watching from his hidden chamber. As soon as the soldier entered the diplomatic room, the old Velter felt it. A wave of something warm and alive seemed to flow from the human. It was not hostile or threatening. If anything, it felt like comfort, like the feeling of coming home after a long, difficult journey. But it was powerful. Typhon could feel his own carefully maintained emotional barriers beginning to respond to whatever the human was unconsciously projecting. The old teacher had to work harder than he had in centuries to maintain his control. In the main chamber, Princess Zara was struggling. The soldier seemed more present today, more aware of his surroundings. When Ambassador Carter spoke about trade routes, he nodded thoughtfully. When she mentioned the possibility of joint military exercises, his attention sharpened. He was not just a guard standing silently in the background. He was participating in the conversation. Without speaking, Your Highness, Ambassador Carter said, yesterday you mentioned that your people value harmony above all else. We would like to understand more about how you have achieved such peace in your empire. Zara tried to focus on the question, but the soldier was looking at her again. This time she saw him notice the slight tremor in her hands. She saw him see the faint glow that was beginning to show around her skin. And she saw the moment when he realized that something was wrong. The soldier did something that shocked everyone in the room. He stepped forward, breaking diplomatic protocol. "Excuse me," he said to Ambassador Carter, "but I think Her Highness might not be feeling well." His voice was deep and rough like gravel, mixed with honey. Zara had not heard him speak before, and the sound of it went through her like lightning. But there was genuine concern in his tone, not the formal politeness of diplomacy. Ambassador Carter looked surprised. "Sergeant Murphy, please return to your position." So his name was Murphy. Sergeant Murphy. Zara found herself repeating the name in her mind, loving the sound of it. But Murphy did not move back. Instead, he looked directly at Zara. "Ma'am, are you all right? You look like you might be running a fever." He was right. She was burning up from the inside, and it was getting worse by the minute. The crystal walls of the chamber were starting to glow more brightly, responding to the psychic energy that was beginning to leak from her failing control. "I am," Zara started to say, but the words came out as barely a whisper. She tried again. "I am fine, Sergeant Murphy. Thank you for your concern." The way she said his name seemed to affect him too. Something flickered in his blue eyes. Recognition of the connection that was building between them, whether they wanted it or not. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I've seen a lot of people in distress. You're not fine. Is there something I can do to help?" The offer of help, given so simply and sincerely, was almost Zara's undoing. She felt her barriers crack like thin ice under pressure. Heat began to pour off her in waves, and the lights in the room started to flicker. Ambassador Carter stepped between them. "Sergeant, I think we should give Her Highness some space." But Murphy did not move. He kept looking at Zara with those concerned blue eyes. "Whatever's wrong," he said, "you don't have to face it alone." In his hidden chamber, Elder Tyvon watched in amazement as something unprecedented happened. Instead of making Princess Zara's loss of control worse, the human soldier's presence seemed to be providing an anchor point. The psychic storm that should have been building was being somehow stabilized. The human was not just causing Zara's emotional awakening. He was also, without knowing it, helping her survive it. For the first time in 800 years, Elder Tyvon began to think that everything his people believed about emotions might be wrong. The next diplomatic meeting was supposed to be the most important one. They were going to discuss the boundaries between human and Velter space and how to prevent conflicts between their two species. Princess Zara had spent the morning preparing herself using every meditation technique Elder Tyvon had ever taught her. None of it was working. The moment Sergeant Murphy walked into the room, she felt her carefully built defenses start to crumble. He looked tired today, like he had not slept well. There were dark circles under his blue eyes, and his uniform was not as perfectly neat as it had been before. Somehow this made him seem more human, more real, and that made everything worse for Zara. Elder Tyvon was watching again from his hidden chamber. He had spent the night studying ancient texts about Velter history, looking for any mention of what was happening to his former student. What he had found was disturbing. There were old stories from before his people had learned perfect emotional control about something called soul bonding. It was said to happen when two beings found their perfect emotional match. The story said it was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Beautiful because it created a connection deeper than anything else in the universe. Terrible because if the two beings could not learn to balance their bond, it would destroy them both. Tavian had always thought those stories were just legends. Now he was beginning to wonder if they were historical records. In the main chamber, Ambassador Carter was talking about patrol routes and early warning systems. It was important work, the kind of detailed planning that could prevent wars before they started. But Princess Zara could barely follow the conversation. All her attention was focused on trying to contain the storm that was building inside her. The temperature in the room was rising. Again, the crystal walls were starting to glow. With that soft light that meant psychic energy was building. Commander Keck stood beside Zara's chair, ready to act if things went wrong. He had evacuation procedures planned and emergency shields ready to deploy. Sergeant Murphy seemed to sense the tension in the room. His soldiers' instincts were telling him that something dangerous was happening. Even if he did not understand what it was, he kept glancing at Princess Zara. And each time he did, she felt another crack appear in her mental barriers. Then Ambassador Carter asked the question that changed everything. "Sergeant Murphy," she said, "you've been very quiet during these meetings. As our military advisor, do you have any thoughts on these security arrangements?" Murphy straightened up and looked directly at Ambassador Carter, but when he spoke, his words were not about military tactics or security zones. Instead, he began to tell a story. "Ma'am, if I may," he said, "I'd like to tell you about something that happened back on Earth. It might help explain why we humans take protection so seriously." Ambassador Carter nodded, though she looked confused by the change of subject. Murphy's voice became softer, more personal. "I grew up in a small town called Cedar Falls, population about 3,000 people. Nothing special about it, just a quiet place where folks knew each other and looked out for their neighbors." As he spoke, Zara found herself drawn into his words. She could almost see the place he was describing, a peaceful community surrounded by green fields and rolling hills. "When I was 22, Murphy continued, we got word that hostile aliens were headed our way. Not you folks, different ones. Ones that didn't want to talk or make treaties. They just wanted to take what we had." His voice grew harder, but there was no anger in it. Just a deep sadness that seemed to reach across the room and touch Zara's heart. "The government told us they were sending help, but we all knew it wouldn't get there in time, so we had a choice. We could run, leave our homes and everything we'd built, or we could stay and fight for what mattered to us." Murphy paused, looking down at his hands. "Most of us chose to stay. Farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, kids barely old enough to hold a rifle. We weren't soldiers, but we were defending our home." Zara felt tears starting to form in her eyes. She had never cried before, not even when her father died. But something about Murphy's story was breaking down walls inside her that had been built over a lifetime. "The battle lasted 3 days," Murphy said. "We lost a lot of good people. My neighbor Pete, who used to fix my motorcycle when it broke down. Mrs. Henderson, who taught at the elementary school for 40 years. My little sister Jenny, who was studying to be a doctor. The pain in his voice was so real, so raw, that Zara felt it like a physical blow. She gripped the arms of her chair, trying to hold herself together. When it was over, Murphy continued. Half the town was gone, but we'd saved the other half, and we'd learned something important. When you're fighting for something you love, when you're protecting people who matter to you, you find strength you didn't know you had. He looked up then, his blue eyes meeting Zara's across the room. That's why we take security so seriously, ma'am. Not because we want to fight, but because we know what it costs when you can't protect the things that matter. The sincerity in his voice, the pain he was sharing, the love he had for his lost family and friends hit Zara like a wave. She felt something inside her chest explode outward, all the emotions she had been holding back for 25 years, suddenly breaking free at once. The crystal chamber filled with blinding light. Energy crackled along the walls like lightning, and the temperature spiked so high that the air itself began to shimmer. The psychic storm that Princess Zara had been fighting finally broke free, and it was more powerful than anything her people had seen in 2 centuries. Ambassador Carter and the young guard were thrown backward by the force of it. Commander Kex activated the emergency shields, but the energy was too strong. It began to overload the ship systems, causing lights to explode and metal to twist. In his hidden chamber, Elder Tyvon felt the storm hit him like a physical blow. He had experienced uncontrolled psychic events before, but nothing like this. This was not just emotional release. This was the birth of something entirely new. But instead of running away like everyone else, Sergeant Murphy did something that defied all logic and common sense. He ran toward the center of the storm. The energy field around Princess Zara was so intense that it should have killed him instantly. But Murphy pushed through it, ignoring the pain as the psychic forces tore at his mind and body. He could see her at the center of it all, collapsed on the floor, overwhelmed by the very emotions she had tried so hard to control. Princess, he shouted over the roar of the energy storm. Princess, can you hear me? She looked up at him with eyes that were wild with terror and confusion. She was experiencing every emotion she had ever suppressed all at once, and it was destroying her. Murphy dropped to his knees beside her, reaching out to touch her face despite the energy that was crackling around them. Hey, he said softly. It's going to be okay. You're not alone. The moment his hand touched her skin, something incredible happened. The chaotic storm of psychic energy began to calm, not disappear, but organize itself into something stable and manageable. Murphy's presence, his steady emotional strength, was providing an anchor point that Zara could hold on to. She looked into his eyes and saw not fear or judgment, but understanding. He had shared his deepest pain with her, and now he was willing to risk his life to help her through hers. I don't know how to stop it, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the dying storm. Then don't stop it, Murphy said, his hand still gentle against her face. Just let it be what it is. I'm here. I've got you. And somehow, impossibly, that was enough. Princess Zara woke up in her private chambers 3 hours later. For a moment, she could not remember what had happened. Then it all came rushing back, and she sat up quickly, expecting to feel the Familiar panic and chaos of lost control, but something was different. The emotions were still there, stronger than ever, but they were not destroying. Sorry. It was like a river that had been dammed for years had finally found a proper channel to flow through. She could feel everything, love and fear and joy and sadness. But she could also think clearly. Sergeant Murphy was sitting in a chair beside her bed. His uniform was torn and burned from the psychic storm, and there were new scars on his hands where the energy had touched him. But he was alive, and he was watching her with those concerned blue eyes. "How are you feeling?" he asked quietly. Zara considered the question seriously. "Different," she said finally. "Like I have been asleep for my whole life and just woke up. Are you hurt?" Murphy looked down at his hands and shrugged. "Nothing that won't heal. I've had worse." He paused, then looked back at her. "What happened in there? I've never seen anything like that. Energy storm." "I lost control," Zara said simply. "My people, we are taught from birth to suppress all emotions because when we feel strongly, our minds create psychic energy that can be dangerous. I have spent my entire life learning to feel nothing. But you felt something when I told my story," Murphy said. "It was not a question." Zara nodded. "Your pain, your love for your family, your courage in defending them. It was so real, so honest. I have never experienced anything like it. My people hide their feelings so completely that we forget what real emotion looks like." Murphy was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry. I didn't know talking about Jenny and the others would affect you like that. If I had known, you would have done the same thing," Zara said, and she knew it was true. "You shared your story because you thought it would help the ambassador understand why humans value protection so much. You were trying to build trust between our peoples." "Yeah, well, I'm not sure I succeeded. Last I saw, everyone was running for the emergency exits." Zara smiled, and the expression felt strange on her face. She could not remember the last time she had smiled and meant it. "You succeeded more than you know." The door to her chambers opened. An elder Tyvon entered. The old Velter looked like he had aged another 100 years in the past few hours. His silver hair was disheveled and his usually perfect robes were wrinkled. "Princess," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "You are alive. And you are stable." "Master," Zara said, starting to rise from the bed. Tyvon waved her back down. "No, child. Rest. What you have been through would have killed most of our people. The fact that you survived it and that you are still sane is a miracle." Tyvon's ancient eyes moved to Murphy, who had stood up when the elder entered. "And you, human, you entered a psychic storm that should have torn your mind apart. Why?" Murphy looked uncomfortable with the attention. "She needed help. That's what you do when someone needs help. You help them, even at the risk of your own life. Especially then." Tyvon studied the human for a long moment. "Remarkable. Your people truly are as different from us as our report suggested." "Master," Zara said, "what happened to me? Why did Sergeant Murphy's presence stabilize the storm instead of making it worse?" Tyvon sat down heavily in another chair. "I have been researching our oldest records, stories from before we learned to control our emotions. There are legends about something called Soul bonding, where two beings become emotionally connected in a way that allows them to share and balance each other's psychic energy. Soul bonding, Murphy asked. Is that what this is? I believe so, Tywin said. Your emotional patterns complement Princess Zara's in a way that creates stability instead of chaos, where she has been taught to suppress all feeling you experience emotions fully but remain rational. Your presence gives her permission to feel without losing herself to those feelings. Zara looked at Murphy, trying to understand what the elder was saying. You mean that when I am near him, I can have emotions without creating psychic storms? More than that, Tywin said. I believe that together you represent a new way for our people to exist. Instead of hiding from our emotions, we might learn to live with them as the humans do. Over the next several days, Princess Zara and Sergeant Murphy worked together to understand what was happening between them. They found that when they were near each other, Zara could experience the full range of emotions without losing control. She could feel sadness without creating destructive energy. She could feel joy without overloading the ship systems. She could even feel anger without hurting anyone. Murphy, for his part, found that being around Zara helped him process his own emotions more deeply. The grief he carried for his lost family and friends did not disappear, but it became something he could live with instead of something that haunted him. Ambassador Carter was fascinated by what she saw. The diplomatic talks continued, but now they had a new dimension. Princess Zara was no longer the perfect, emotionless diplomat she had been before. She laughed at Murphy's jokes. She cried when he told her more stories about his sister Jenny. She got excited when they discussed plans for cultural exchange between their peoples, and through it all she remained completely in control. Elder Tywin spent long hours observing them, taking notes and communicating with the High Council on the Velter homeworld. The implications of what they were discovering could change their entire civilization. For thousands of years, he told Zara one evening, we have believed that emotions were the enemy of order and peace. We built our entire society around the idea that feelings must be suppressed or they would destroy us. And now, Zara asked, now I think we were only half right. Uncontrolled emotions are indeed dangerous, but perhaps the answer is not to eliminate them entirely. Perhaps the answer is to learn to experience them in balance the way humans do. 2 weeks after the first diplomatic meeting, Princess Zara and Sergeant Murphy stood together on the observation deck of her ship, looking out at the stars. The negotiations had been successful. Their two species would be allies, not enemies. Trade agreements had been signed, and plans were being made for joint exploration missions. But more important than any treaty was what they had discovered about themselves. I have to go back to my homeworld, Zara said. The High Council wants to study what has happened to me. They want to understand if other Velter can learn to live with emotions the way I have. Murphy nodded. He had known this moment would come. And I have to go back to Earth. My unit has orders for a new assignment. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars. Finally, Zara spoke again. This is not goodbye, she said. What we have discovered is too important to abandon. Our peoples need to learn from each other. I will convince the council to assign me as a permanent ambassador to humanity, and I'll request a transfer to the diplomatic corps. Murphy said, turns out I'm pretty good at building bridges between species. Zara smiled, the expression coming easily to her now. Together, Murphy agreed. As their ships prepared to part ways, both of them knew that this was just the beginning. They had found something that could change the galaxy, a way for two very different species to help each other become more than they could be alone. Princess Zara had learned that emotions were not something to be feared and hidden, but something to be experienced and shared, and Sergeant Murphy had learned that sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting, but from simply being present when someone needs you most. The stars watched silently as two souls, bonded across the vastness of space, began to build a new future for both their peoples.